Hi everyone, and welcome to the Imagining a New We video blog with me, Dr. Samantha Cutrara, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. We're continuing our pandemic pedagogy series today, and I just want to thank all of you for your support. I get such nice emails, and I get such nice direct messages on Facebook and Twitter saying how much people like this series, and I'm glad that we've been able to bring some big ideas about teaching and learning history to this pandemic time, and hopefully we can continue the conversation when we all get back to face-to-face teaching, whenever that is. I say that I'm always excited about the speakers I get to interview, and not only is today no exception, I am especially excited to talk to today's person because it is someone that is doing such a transformative public history work in the United States, and I'm so inspired by these types of projects because, as I've said in a lot of the videos, if not every video, I think that history should be a transformative subject. I think that history should be something that drives activism. And I think of Christina Llewellyn's video when she said the different histories that you know and the different histories that you listen to help shape your political commitments. And that's why I'm so excited for these creative public history projects, such as the Slave Dwelling Project that's created and run by McGill Jr. Joe is a public historian. About 15 years ago, he started sleeping in former slave dwellings as a way to connect and narrate a history of slavery in the United States. 15 years on, he has a robust education program. The Slave Dwelling Project is like this thing that you can interact with for classroom use, and he's done TEDx talks. Like, I'm so excited to be able to talk to him for this humble but important, that's a contradiction, but both are true. This humble video series that aims to make history more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for students. One of the really exciting things about connecting with Joe today is that on May the 9th, he is going to be doing a live stream from a former slave dwelling. And because we can't be in person in the same way, this live stream is kind of a new thing for the Slave Dwelling Project, and I'm so excited to talk with him about that. And please go on Facebook, connect with the live stream, and watch it on the 9th. More details will be in the video and after our interview as well. So let's go over to Joe. Hi, Joe. It is so wonderful to speak with you today. I'm really excited that you're able to participate in the Pandemic Pedagogy series. But before we start with the questions, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone about you and the Slave Dwelling Project?
Yes, Samantha, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. My name is Joseph McGill. I am the founder of the Slave Dwelling Project. And the Slave Dwelling Project is a very simple concept. I find slave dwellings wherever they are in these United States, and I ask the owners if I could spend the night in these spaces just to bring attention to these spaces, because there was a point in our history where we could go to a site where these buildings exist and learn all about the nice, beautiful big house, the architectural significance of the big house. You learn about the place settings, the vaulted ceilings, the hardwood floors, the nice grand staircase. But what was missing from that is the stories of enslaved people. You know, who physically built this house? You know, who cut down those trees that made that house? Who made the bricks that's now that house? Whose labor was stolen for all that house to exist? All those elements of the story on these sites, mainly plantations, were missing. And because at the time that I created the Slave Dwelling Project, I was an employee of the National Trust for Historic Preservation here in the United States. And they do a beautiful job in preserving buildings. But missing element there is the enslaved people. So knowing these buildings exists and having experience in sleeping at historical sites, because I'm a Civil War reenactor, and having the DNA that I have, all those things came together in this crazy idea called the Slave Dwelling Project. And of course, I acquired a list from the State Historic Preservation Office, South Carolina State Historic Preservation Office. When I told them my intent, why I wanted to acquire this list, they understood, because they're preservationists just like myself. And I got this list from them, and I started making phone calls on places I could stay. And initially, it was somewhat of a hard sell, trying to convince these folks that I come in peace, I mean no harm. Because if you were on the other end of such a phone call, you would have to hesitate. You'd have to pause, because you would want to know if I'm about reparations. Am I about looking for artifacts, or am I about looking for ghosts? Well, none of those above, none of the above things. It's all about preservation. It's all about preservation and bringing attention to these buildings where, enslaved people live. Because when the buildings are there, it's easy to tell the stories of the people who inhabited those spaces. When those buildings are gone, you can easily ignore that story. So that's basically what the Slave Dwelling Project is all about.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I have so many questions that draw from those experiences, but I really want to focus this conversation on this particular moment, because your work is field-based, and so we can't be in the field in the same way. Has this shifted, the pandemic, has it shifted your ideas about history at all? During this time, because you have to rethink how to engage with these ideas for the people that you do work with?
Yeah, well, but for the now, it certainly has changed the way I do things, the way I do business. Yeah, as you said, I can't go physically to these places. From the middle of March up until the immediate future, actually through the end of June, all of my physicalness at these places has been eliminated. It has either been postponed or canceled. Excuse me. It's either been postponed or canceled. And because of that, we have to come up with these creative ways to still engage our audience. And that creative way is social media, the way that you and I are engaging right now. Me still going and being at a place physically, and through social media, communicating with people. So yeah, for right now, for the now, it certainly has changed drastically. I call this thing that I'm doing, I call it social distance learning. Again, giving folks the opportunity to engage with us. So, in coming out of this, I see that it's going to be different. The way we engage our audience is going to be different, and these sites are going to have to adjust accordingly. Because even when we get the yellow light to go and hang out with people in places that sometimes are familiar, sometimes unfamiliar, there's still going to be skepticism there. There's still going to be those folks who are going to be a little nervous. Then there are going to be those who don't care. They don't follow the science. They just want to get out there and do what they do without regard for affecting others. But that's another story. But these sites themselves are going to have to come to the realization, if they have not already, and I'm sure they have by now, that they're going to have to change their way of doing business. The conversations I have with these sites now, the ones that want to postpone or even cancel, is that we may put another date on the calendar this year, but as we get closer to that date, we may find out it's not feasible. It's not sensible. It's not wise for me to get on an airplane and come to where you are. And if that's indeed the case, then we could still do something. We could still do social media, still interact with an audience, and we can concentrate on that particular site. And I'm experimenting with that right now. I'm going to be doing that this weekend. I just yesterday, maybe 2 days ago, also locked in another local site in Charleston, South Carolina, the Aiken Red House. And on the last Saturday of this month, I'll be spending a night there, all alone, solo. I'll be by myself, but that's kind of where what we're experimenting with right now. I think that for the immediate future, that is going to be the way that the Slave Dwelling Project is going to operate.
Do you think the way that people will hear and learn from your project will change the way they think about history because it is going to be a remote social distance interaction, social distance learning, rather than being in this space? Do you think people will change their ideas about history, or do you think that because the project is so transformative on its own, it will still get the same messages across?
Well, I think it's going to be a little of both, because there's an element of those who engaged in a history who were fed a history that was revisionist, and then there are those elements of folks, a lot of them who look like myself, who refuse to set foot on a plantation because of the historical trauma involved. I think that through the methods, through social media and Facebook Live and Zoom, if those folks would let those guards down and let me be their eyes and ears, I think we can get to those folks. And I don't know if there's anything that I can say to them at the time that I'm saying it that would convince them that it's okay to come to these sites. It's okay to engage with these sites, and if they just want to continue to engage them remotely, then so be it. Then engage them remotely. But it's up to those sites to make sure that they're telling the right stories, that they're telling the complete stories of these places. Not only stories about those, the folks who inhabited those big houses, the enslavers, but they also have to tell the stories of those who were enslaved. So it's going to take ideas like this. It's going to take folks like myself. It's going to take other folks with other projects, folks who live and breathe some element of African American history that's been neglected in the past, and that's pretty much all of African American history. But it's going to take those folks who's going to carve out that slice, that niche, and live and breathe them, that part of history, like myself, to make sure that despite this virus, despite all that we're going through right now, that we build a better thing. Build a better method of making sure that we disseminate a history that's truthful and all inclusive.
I really love what you said one of the things that I heard from what you said is how that people can engage in this work in a way that perhaps they might feel more comfortable with or safer with, because they don't want to go to the site itself. And to me, that's such a exciting and rich kind of takeaway from this COVID time, that it can actually allow for a deeper interaction, or an interaction that might not have happened if it was in person. I also like that you said fed a revisionist history, because it is so often when people are saying that, you can't bring those histories in, you're revising history. Well, no, a white central narrative is a revisionist history, right? It's not inclusive of the people and the labor that built these nations, right?
Right.
Do you think the way we teach history will and should change then after this moment? Do you think people will pick up on those exciting opportunities to engage with different people in different ways? Do you think that is something people will embrace after this time?
Well, right now it's something that's forced upon us.
Right.
Because I know that going into the school year, no teacher thought that they would be a month into having no school, or in some cases longer than a month. None of these teachers thought that the school year was over, for the year, when they were told a month ago that you go home today and we'll figure this out. No, I don't think anybody thought that figuring out meant that there was not going to be any school this school term. And right now there are doubts in some places as to the fall, August. Going back to school in August right now is questionable in some places. Nobody thought that. So it was kind of forced on us that we are adjusting. And some of these things that we're doing now are going to linger. It's mandatory that they do. But one of the problems with that is it's also identifying some of the disparities between the haves and the have-nots. In order for folks to engage in these opportunities, they have to have the technology. Their homes have to be equipped as such. See, that also addresses the economic divide. It also addresses accumulated wealth. There are a lot of folks who comes from family who look like myself. That wealth is not there. Those computers are not there. That Wi-Fi is not in that home. So we have to deal with that. If we want this to be a part of how we operate in the future, we have to address that. We have to deal with that. But I do see this method of interpreting at sites as something that's here to stay. I think it should be something that should be here to stay, because the physicalness of these spaces and interacting with these spaces, these people being comfortable with coming to these spaces and interacting with these spaces in a manner that they did prior to the virus. I just don't think that's going to be around, at least not in the immediate future. It's just not there. And the science is dictating that. But the problem with that is, not everybody believes the science. A lot of folks are thinking about this economically. You're thinking about it economically, and you're thinking about it economically. That's if you want to connect the dots, you got to look at it the way the enslavers looked at it. That's the way they looked at it. They were looking at the output. What can these people, enslaved people, get me? What can they do for me? It's not necessarily what can I do for them, but what can they do for me? Now, if you move forward with that same concept, you've got a workforce that if they expose themselves to their workplace, then they're exposing themselves to that virus. And when you look at the economic disparities, and the fact that you get more African Americans who are affected by this, or that virus is doing more to them, or killing more of them, you go back to connecting these dots. Well, why is that? Well, the reason is because they bring to the table poor health. And you could tie this poor health to, again, the haves and the have-not, accumulated wealth. The wealthier you are, the healthier you are, because it has to do with healthcare. Because in the United States, healthcare is tied in with having a job for a lot of folks. And if your unemployment has always been high, or if you are part of the criminal justice system, which part of what replaced slavery. Slavery ended, yes, but look what we placed it. Convict labor, Jim Crow laws, and redlining, and poll taxes. All of these things were elements that disenfranchised the African American community. So here's an opportunity to connect these dots.
Yeah, I really appreciate the tie that you are making between past history of slavery in the United States with things that are happening right now politically, because I think it's those historical links that really help generate activism and change from people to say, right, this isn't this moment, this isn't just this thing that is happening right now. It is this longer legacy, because like you said, with accumulated wealth, it's also like that accumulated health, because also of how it can get into your DNA too, right? Like a legacy of healthcare and nutrition and all that. So thank you for making those links. I have a question about before I get to the last question, I do have a question about this notion of like being in the spaces, because I was a living history museum interpreter once upon a time, and one of the things I really loved was this interaction between people. And one of the things I'm seeing now with some museums is that they're creating videos in the spaces, but there isn't the same type of interaction. What do you think about that? Like, I know you're going to do a live stream, so you will be able to interact. Do you think live streams are a better way to go, maybe, to be able to ensure that there's a conversation about history?
Well, it's better than nothing. We're experimenting. We're learning as we go. Again, we're in a situation. You either do this or you don't. You just die on the vine if you don't. In what I'm seeing, I see a lot of folks out there doing this, and anytime I see somebody out there doing this, including the stories of African Americans, I pull that out and I put it on my Facebook page, because they're doing the right thing. They're calling the names of these enslaved people who were a part of that site. They're telling the real story. They're not just telling the stories about this enslaver. They're including the stories of the enslaved. So I think that any organizations that's out there doing that right now and being inclusive of the story, I think that's a beautiful thing. And this is their opportunity to do the right thing if they haven't been doing it in the past. I'm picking up on some of that too. My prior history, pre-virus, if that's a term, I don't know if I want to start that, but I see some organizations out there that are now in these videos. They're telling those stories, the elements of the story that they should have been telling all along. And I think this opportunity, this virus has kind of put them in that place, because that old story that they used to tell, you could get on your first few, maybe 1-2 first videos, and you could tell that story the way you've been telling it, but that's going to run out. If you want to keep your audience engaged, you got to start telling them those things you weren't telling them before. And those things that you weren't telling them before includes us. Now, I hope that you're telling it in a manner that you should be telling it. I hope you're not glorifying it in the sense that it's gone with the wind, or the hoop skirt and the mint julep. I hope you're not telling that element of the story. I'm hoping that you're telling the real stories about these people whose labor was stolen, who enabled these enslavers to live the lives that they lived, and the fact that these folks were brought over here not only for their brute strength, but their knowledge of growing rice, whatever that enslaver brought them over here for. It was just more than their physical labor in some cases, and they contributed heavily and highly, to the building of this nation. I hope you're telling those stories in this new you that you're now creating.
Yeah, and actually, like, that makes me think too, because sometimes those interactions with visitors are not positive ones. Sometimes there are people that really just want to stop the narrative at a particular point. So yeah, that's a really good point, that the videos can allow for something else. And there was someone from another museum in Toronto that I spoke to who also said that this is an opportunity to rethink the narrative of the museum, not just the type of programming. So yeah, thank you for that. So I'll move to the last question. So my research is in national history classrooms, and again, I'm based in Canada. And what I found was that there are these divides that can go up. That even though Canada likes to say that we're this big multicultural country, and we certainly have a different set of racial dynamics as the United States, but in no way less better, that it can really exacerbate an us versus them. And one of the things that I talk about in my upcoming book, Transforming the Canadian History Classroom, Imagining a New We, which I just say for the Americans watching, it's not just about Canadian history, is that we need to do a better job of imagining a we that is inclusive of the stories that we keep forgetting, ignoring, silencing, that we keep saying are other stories, that we keep saying are the stories we'll tell after we tell the main story. And this was really influenced too, a lot of these ideas, by my own background, living in the Caribbean as a child and living in the Southern United States for a portion of the time, because I was able to see a different integration of histories than I have in Canadian history classrooms. So my last question is, do you think that this will bring about greater opportunities for us to imagine a new we? Sometimes people are talking about the creative aspects of imagining. Sometimes people talk about the community part of the we. What do you think? Do you think that this can provide more opportunities for us to imagine a new we during this time as well as after this time?
Yeah, I think this is the time. We must imagine new we, because I didn't care much for that normal that prior to this virus. I could tell you a lot of bad things about that. I often hear the term make America great again, and I think, well, when was that? As an African American person in my skin, where was that? Maybe the time right after the Civil War, when the Freedmen's Bureau was active from 1865 to 1867, before they made that go away. Maybe that was a great time in history. At least the effort was there to make this a more equitable America, at least for the African Americans, the recently freed people of that period. But even that went away with with Jim Crow laws and convict labor and all this. Yeah, this is that opportunity to pick up on that, to right those wrongs, to correct that. This 1619 project, New York Times, the
prize winning 1619 project.
Exactly. but the thing about that is, when she put that out there, and I was so proud, along with a lot of other African Americans, to see that put out there the way that was put out there, and then of course the pushback came. That pushback, these white scholars, started pushing back. But see, that what that highlighted was the fact that for so long the folks who disseminated the history to us were white folks. Telling us the story, giving us that white storyline, the white male narrative. It's slanted towards him. Well, what this gives us, it gives us the opportunity to go back and readdress those things that we didn't address before. Are those things that we tried to sugarcoat in the past, like what we did to the natives, what we did by enslaving people, what we did during World War II of in turning the Japanese. We need to put these elements into our story, and this is our opportunity to do that. This is our opportunity to correct that wrong, and I think it took this virus to present the opportunity. Now it's up to folks like us to make sure that now that door is open, we walk through it. We take advantage of this opportunity, and add those elements, to our narrative. It's nothing new to me, because I've been at this thing for the last 10 years, the Slave Dwelling Project. I've been doing it. It's just that we gotta find those other folks, and I know those other folks who are running parallel tracks. Every now and then we merge, and then we get back in our lanes and we do what we do. But we gotta continue to find these places, these sites that are doing the right thing, that have been doing the right thing. We got to praise them. Those sites on the verge of wanting to do the right thing, but they don't know how to do it, but they want to. The desire is there. That's good. There's that opportunity to enhance that, to build on that. And the biggest challenge is going to be convincing those sites that don't want to go there. They want to stay in that comfort zone that they're in. They want to continue to those are the ones we got to work on. But the thing is, that group is getting smaller. The non-conformists, conformists in the sense that they continue to push that white male narrative. That group is getting smaller.
Well, one thing that you had said was like, you had said something, I can't remember the exact phrase, but something about like, this is the history that like white men has taught us, but we're also learning history in our homes, right? And so it hasn't been the only narrative. There have been so many different parallel narratives, and I think too, being home, being with family, and this is something that came up in another video in Oral Histories, we can listen to our own family histories differently, and we can challenge our historic sites to be able to make space for that. Which I hear from you is such an exciting potential. So thank you for this. This was so fantastic. This was such a great way to spend 40 minutes.
Well, it's been that long.
I know. We can keep talking.
I get on these calls and then I start them, and then I say, "Oh man, this is gonna take a while." But then we get into the conversation, as you just stated. I love talking about the subject matter, especially with folks as knowledgeable as you. I was impressed by you when you told me that, you said you stayed in the Caribbean and then in the South.
Yeah, in
And
Florida.
now you're in Canada. Now you're in Canada. Hey, that's some experience. That you saw this thing from some angles, and you were at ages enough to know your surroundings and take it in. So I admire that.
Well, I mean, thanks. I didn't pick up myself individually and go, but I was the only white student in a lot of the schools I went to as an elementary school student. I was the only English student in a couple of the schools I went to in the Caribbean. And I was like, okay, if you just give me a little bit of time to understand this history, I will understand what's happening here, because this feels different than Canada. And then coming to Canada, and especially, or coming back to Canada, because I'm a Canadian, coming back to Canada and working with racialized students, working with Black students, and like recognizing that even though it's not like the teaching of enslaved people in the Caribbean and the United States is so well done, but there's a lot more acknowledgement than in Canada. And Canada had a history of slavery for over 200 years that doesn't really get talked about that much. And so it's interesting to be able to bring these histories together, because I think the more we focus on transnational histories, the more as we can be able to talk about experiences across the diaspora, which is so important. And I think this moment helps us do that more, because we are all forced to connect in this way.
Yeah.
It was so great to meet you. I hope we get a chance to talk more and collaborate in the future. Thank you so much, Joe.
Yeah, and when the dust settles, whenever that is, this year, next year, whenever, when folks are comfortable with, getting more intimate and hugging and all that, maybe we can, you can come and join us at one of these sites.
Oh, I would love that. I was supposed to go to Atlanta in March for the Public History Conference, and there were a couple other things I wanted to do in the South. And I was just in Jacksonville, and there were a couple different sites that I wanted to go visit, and I didn't get a chance to because of anxiety. So yes, I would love to go to an event of yours whenever that happens.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. All right, we'll be in touch. It was wonderful to meet you.
All right, well, you take care.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.